Welcome, welcome. Automated charm testing and heads. Yeah. So one of the things we discussed at a sprint with a couple of us, George and Kapil, Gustavo, myself, and Mark Mims last week, was the need to effectively take care of whatever we can automate in testing for charm authors. We need to do that. And because it's such a big, complex system, that the interaction of charms, we want to make sure that we're doing a continuous integration type of story. So we came up with a plan. It's pretty sound. It's going to require some development of some of the smart test runner. But we're going to leverage some existing things, whether it's probably the waterfall thing, and or maybe Checkins, or maybe both. We don't know exactly yet, but we're not going to choose the implementation details. We just want to make sure that there's some other testing resources that have been made around charms. We want to make sure we incorporate them or deprecate them and bring them into this system. So I should mirror.
And incorporate them very tightly into the charm submission process too.
Yeah, so
can I have a nice gated truck? Open stack.
Yeah, I mean, we can gate, but I mean, not on PBAs, but yeah.
Is this the right approach outlined though? I mean, so the idea is that what we want to be able to mock is an interface that we can apply against everything that says it has that interface.
you just said mock,
yeah.
And we decided we don't want to mock. We can discuss mock.
It's exercise. Implement something that exercises that interface.
Absolutely.
Everything that says it doesn't, that doesn't live in the charm. That is, we have an implementation of something that triggers every interface that's been agreed to.
So the idea is that we would actually be testing the graph, but we would be testing it instead of against actual things.
We don't need to test any graph, right? We test each charm independently by exercising all the interfaces it claims.
But they're fundamentally connected.
Exactly what we're talking about.
But it doesn't live in the, like, so everything that implements website has to carry the same test script,
no.
Whereas I'm saying we would have the website test package, which exercises anything that claims to implement.
So that is somewhat of a mocking approach, in that you're assuming that you have control of one side. What we're actually proposing to do is say, test relating every way that you claim to be able to relate in your metadata. So if you say you provide website, let's test everything that requires website and run its tests after that relation. We're going to test the entire graph of possible dependencies.
So I'm picturing these like unit tests for charms, and you're picturing them as
functional tests.
Functional tests, yeah, over a.
Basically integration. I mean, we want to test the end-to-end. Does it do what we think it should do?
Be sound if it implements the interface, and by doing this, we've effectively documented the interfaces in a verifiable way.
I think Gustavo has something to say to this point.
So let's see some value towards science.
So what we have in the screen now is an implementation suggestion, and at least I have some difficulties like designing the pressure. Can we move instead into a requirements mode where we try to capture what's the goals of what we're trying to do, so that this is going to be easier to agree upon? And
yeah, let's scope this for 1204 too, so we don't get.
But we can scope later.
Right.
Scoping, we can sit down and try to see how much we can do.
Okay. Okay.
Right. But I think can we get into what's the outcome of whatever testing system we come up with? What's the outcome of it?
There's lots of dangers that we're trying to avoid, right?
Right.
Charms are loose.
The charm should be tested again. We should be verifiable that it does, that its service it works, and more importantly, that when it's tested, that its relations work against other things. So if one of them changes, that if there's breakage against other things that use that same interface, it's detectable.
Okay, that sounds like we're talking.
Well, something that Ben had brought up earlier that I think is relatively useful is Ben.
Yes.
Thank God. The documentation of the interfaces. having a means to document it in code in a functional means. Solved either way. I don't even care functional or mock, but I think it's a very useful requirement to have come out of this.
Documented interfaces. Okay.
So the problem is you will have some charms which provide interfaces that are not used by other charms, which are not only built into applications. So if you only internally check interfaces, you will need some.
Yeah, interfaces are named conventions. They're not first-class entities.
No enforcement.
Right.
So we have a mechanism to document and to test the interface. Sounds like an interesting idea.
Well, there's some conventions that are emerging about how interfaces are used.
Yeah,
some ways, patterns that we could actually put some testing on.
Having documentation and testing on interfaces would be very good because right now it is very much a convention that has to sort of be intercepted against the name.
Maybe there's a simple sort of get set type pattern that you could.
You're walking to implementation.
Yeah.
The requirement that
what's the requirement that you're trying to say?
So, like, I think the requirement would be to talk to a charm. What are the names of the relation, not relation,
The relation, yeah.
the durations, what are the durations that do I need? Which one are optional, which one are mandatory?
Yeah, but I guess that's...
It's more about how do I implement an interface, I think.
It sounds like we're still going around the first point there. Detect breakage of a charm related to an interface. So it's not clear how we're going to do it, but it sounds like... Does anyone want to complement that with additional information?
Has anyone found interfaces breaking in practice?
No.
That would be nice.
It's been too small.
They're so much.
the sample size is small enough, we can pretty much keep it in our heads.
I don't know if this is right in line. If it's not, tell me, back off on this. But in doing larger functional testing, especially with asynchronous systems, it's often very, very useful to have a mechanism where you can get an event from the system under test that you can then check as opposed to just pulling the crap out of it.
Yeah, a barrier.
So that as a requirement would be very pleasant to see.
Being push-based, not pull-based.
Yeah.
Get told.
So you can ask for
slow.
status, but you can also get told, hey, something's changed, here's the state of the union, whatever. The equivalent of sneaking a look in the message queue. Or, I mean, I don't know your guts,
Is
right?
that an optimization?
Tell authors about breakages, I guess, something like that.
It's a little bit of an optimization, but it also makes doing a lot of large-scale functional testing much more effective over the long term.
Yeah.
Indeed.
A charm can also break just because of install, right?
So
Independent of
Well, how do we capture that? I mean,
What-
there, how do we capture what was just said?
I want to make sure that we're all agreed that we want to detect the breakage of a charm related to an interface, because we kind of jumped again. That is an absolute requirement. We need to be able to detect not only that, but we want to have a good idea of what change broke the relationship
Yes.
between these two charms.
Absolutely.
Right, and can capture this
nice.
idea as well, please.
But I think there was one case that comes to mind. It was the use of the MySQL example. I don't know if it's been fixed, but the fact that the database name was dependent on a property, on a setting that could go and see the characters or whatever it was. That comes to mind.
Well, database name was based on the service name, but the service name wasn't necessarily a proper database name.
Yeah, in general, that sort of thing.
Indeed.
But that's fixable without breakage on the other side, though.
It's just...
It's an encoding as you create the database name.
No, there was also, I think, MySQL was copied and created and turned into Postgres, and like dashes didn't work for usernames or something. You kind of want to know that right away. Just deploy and delay. Oops, that doesn't work. Rather than waiting for the first person to try. But that we're saying the same thing. Detect the breakage and identify the actual charms, a change that broke
Yes.
that relationship.
Which change broke that graph against it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying relationship.
Same thing.
It's kind of, when I say the relationship, I mean the graph, definitely. Because it's important to note that you can't just test the two sides of a relationship. If one of the other sides has requirements to be in a runnable state, you actually have to find the whole graph of all possibilities. Essentially, if I want to test HA proxy, I'm going to actually end up testing basically everything, because HA proxy implements HTTP, and everything is providing HTTP, so everything is going to be tested. Well, then everything is going to test all the MySQL providers and all of every other provider of every other interface, essentially. So the graph gets really big, but that's okay. We can actually calculate the graph and scale the testing infrastructure up to meet that.
It seems good, but I don't know if it's necessary. I mean, if you bind the implementation of this interface to each of its interfaces and send the messages that it's supposed to get in a controlled pattern.
It's not just about the messages. It's about the service being in a state based on the messages. So when I send, when MySQL sends back hostname and database and username and password,
the only interaction it has
is through the interface. And if you test that interface, you don't necessarily need to test the graph. It's a valid point. Just the interface itself isn't.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
You have communication at the message level in Ensemble, but you have communication at the MySQL level. If you only move the relationship, you won't assert the communication at the MySQL.
And there may be
it's more implied interface than just setting attributes. There's also another.
There may be additional communication that needs to happen after out-of-band communication that Juju's unaware of has happened. So essentially, you know, I give you something that you can then connect back to me and introspect me and change me, and then the config channel comes back with, okay, reload the daemon or something that can't happen through that out-of-band control channel.
So that first point you say detect functional breakage.
I think breakage.
Yeah, I mean, if we're testing functionally, but if we were testing that way, that line would be, it would work for that line, except it wouldn't necessarily.
I don't really understand the difference that, I mean, I understand it is wildly different, the graph isn't needed, but I don't understand how it's actually effective to not test all the other sides of it for real.
Because if the test is independent, if the interface test is, if the interface is a first-class entity, and it is effectively a spec and test against the interface, then it is known that if anything breaks that interface. That's the point, that's how the graph interconnects. And if you test the interconnection.
And how is that not the mock approach?
It is effectively the mock approach.
Okay, then we discussed the weaknesses of that.
We did.
With a system that is so loosely coupled like Juju.
Yeah.
There's weaknesses inherent in mock.
There's additional value into it, in that, because one of the first questions when you're looking at something and how do I use something is, how do I implement this interface? And capturing that as a first-class entity has additional value.
Agreed.
Being able to test it against multiple things that claim to implement it is not something that this approach necessarily gives us. I mean, we can simulate it by building a different graph with components. But
we can basically test the whole possible graph.
Everything that could possibly ever intersect.
Yeah.
Logical or not.
And likely, I mean, there will be some interfaces. There will be some interfaces that are absolutely expensive to change, and we may blacklist them. Like HTTP that becomes ubiquitous, we may just run that in a continuous loop because and deal with the fact that we can't identify the change. I think that's okay. Most of the graphs will be fairly manageable. Most of them will be 4 or 5 levels deep at the most.
Well, okay.
That's like the biggest one that I can think of.
Right, but the common cue is that we test N1, we instantiate the graph just for fulfilling requirements. We're still testing that one and N1 again, and depth 1 against that change.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the aspect of modeling out one-sided interface, that's clearly has all these objections as we just discussed. But it might be nice to at least assert what the expected behavior is in terms of the communication occurring on that interface.
Yeah, it's the kind of mock approach. I think it's fine. You don't have to roll out things right now. Right? I think both are good ideas, and maybe we should do both.
It was easier and lighter way. So to test them off.
Both have good advantages on their sides.
James?
So I just think about the kind of test cycle I go through when I'm doing charm development. So for the last few I've done, I've tested against multiple providers because they do behave slightly differently, and I want to make sure my charm works with as many as possible, so that when someone spins it up on OpenStack, it works as well as it does on EC2. We're going to try and cover that element as well.
Yeah, that's a requirement. We may not satisfy it in the first iteration, but I think that should be a requirement.
How can we word that?
So testing against multiple providers. Yeah. So
Verify
plus
provider neutrality.
that also gives Charm developers who don't necessarily have access to all those environments some way they can submit their Charm for QA.
I think some only small the test of Juju and the test of the Charm, because Juju is supposedly an abstraction of all the providers. So if that breaks all the providers that work on another, that all we need to have something.
Yeah, there can be charms, we don't want them, but there are charm-specific services that can be exposed.
You can have poorly behaved
exposed services.
But providers mean
EC2
We've had poorly behaved charms in the past. Querying the EC2 metadata service, and that's what you want to detect. Is no, use unit get there.
So I want to know if I pull that down on my local dev env, it's going to work.
and what's a
Definitely.
So, did you intend to say about like the providers as in EC2 and OpenStack, or more as in all the charms that provide against all the charms that are required?
No, I think providers as in how, why, EC2 OpenStack.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It might be also useful to do things like people add relation, remove relation, re-add relation again to check and
Yeah.
Yes, we need to be able to
verify item potency.
Yeah, we need to be able to have a flexible way of doing scenarios. Like, because we need to be able to dig into, well, yeah, item potency, verifying item potency definitely, but also even more than that, just being able to write out failure scenarios. I mean,
But it's
I was thinking of one in particular where I found an issue, which was the Cassandra charm. In that, if you try and run that on the local LXC provider, pre the change I made to it, it doesn't work. Because you spin 4 instances and they all try and take every bit of memory in the system because it's running under that.
Because that's what Cassandra does. That actually is a valid memcache. There was an init script on the platform before that would do exactly that. We would say, how much memory do we have? Take 75% of it.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Project memory stat is not actually accurate on LXC. It doesn't take into account memory limits. So, yeah, now that's there's an interesting thing that we didn't cover when we were talking privately, which is peer relations. Yeah. Is 2 enough? Because in Ceph it's not. Ceph, a 2-node Ceph cluster is broken. You have to have 1 or 3. Because of the leader election is naive, essentially. So when there are 2, you have a split brain. You can have it in that state, but you have to move to 3 to have it usable.
We discussed this in terms of having units with numbers.
I'm sorry?
I mean, we discussed this in terms of having units be specified.
But I think the context is testing, right?
Yeah, the testing.
It could use that type of information for the test purpose.
But I think functional tests, you can have functional tests with custom script. You can do whatever is suitable for.
So you could add unit on the functional test.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Then that's
like part of driving the test scenario language should be it's using the command line effectively and capturing that.
Right.
Okay.
That's, can you show in the screen the of tests just to give an idea? The EC2 metadata run.sh.
I don't know what that is.
It's go to Juju or code.launchpad.net/Juju/ftest.
Juju/ftest.
Should do something, right?
Then browse the
code.
Click on code, yeah.
Oh, sorry. A little slow there.
Tests. EC2 WordPress. Run.sh. So this is a real functional test that will run continuously against trunk. So I hope we have something like that for every charm. Exercises the feature of the charm itself.
Right. So the implementation that we had suggested, which is the thing below all these requirements, was that it would essentially prepare a graph and then run tests like this.
Yeah, but so I think preparing a graph this is preparing a graph. Right? You don't have to do that in a magic way. You can actually, whatever is suitable for the charm can be done in that file.
When I wrote the OpenStack testing stuff, I had looked at this as well, and I looked at what Adam had done. So what I'm preparing there is a graph that I know that we need to test. So it seems to be crossover between that and what I think we're trying to get out of the charm testing, which is the kind of automated. I don't want to have to write one of these when I submit a charm necessarily. I think that I want to test this specific graph as a different type of test.
Indeed, and I think actually we can back away from the magic graph detector and just say that, yeah, when you are writing a test, when you're creating a charm, you should be thinking of the full use case for it and write that test for that charm and that interface. Start there. So something exactly like this. So this one actually exercises the MySQL interface of WordPress, essentially. And it also could be in the WordPress charm exercising the other side of that MySQL interface.
Yeah.
And the idea would be that I'd be comfortable with that. Forget the magic graph. Just whenever this charm changes, we run all of its tests. And that would give us a massive amount of coverage over what we have now, which is none. But infinite, actually.
So how do you feel, James? James has done some interesting testing ideas, which is not what I had in mind. So it's interesting to get a different view of the problem.
So I think what Kim just described there is fine on a relatively simple charm set like WordPress MySQL. I'm not sure how well that works when you start actually come back to the OpenStack example, because it is by far and away the most complicated thing we do with Juju times. Trying to express that in something that's charm-centric, the test case for it is quite different. I'm not saying we have to address that, because we could do that in a different way. It'd be nice if we could. So if you look at some of the charms involved there, then if I change Nova Compute, for example, Nova Compute has context with other charms, but should I encapsulate the kind of functional system test in Nova Compute, or should that be something that sits outside any of those things? So, and if any of those things change, I run this test with against
really, what Nova Compute has is a set of provides and requirements. And what you would want to do is have functional tests that make sense for all of those. Not for the entire stack, even though they may end up exercising it. You want to be able to know that that place in the graph has changed, essentially. So Nova Compute sits at a certain spot in the entire deployment graph of OpenStack.
So we deploy that graph and run the test.
So it does. No, the test. We're talking about in the scenario where we're just embedding these tests and just running them on change of this chart. We would essentially have the OpenStack test that tests the whole graph.
Yeah, but I think James is basically stating from experience the same thing I stated in our session, which is when you have a graph, you want to deploy the graph to see if it's working together, right? And in those cases, it sounds awkward to be having that in a specific charm.
Essentially, duplicate the test.
The location for that test is interesting, because the location of that test is the stack, is the thing that describes the composite.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is basically a stack right here.
And so maybe while we don't have stacks, we can have them externally in some server that has a waterfall view, so that you can refer to the test, something like that, right? And once we put, which I hope is not too far away, once we put stacks into the picture, we introduce the test into the stack itself. And
so that
would be the place to put it. I agree.
That is pretty much what I've done today. I have a very simple framework, and I have the concept of defining a test for a stack. And because I can't define a stack, I actually define I have a deploy hook that deploys a stack, and then I have a test hook that runs a set of tests against them. And I happen to have implemented that with another charm at the moment. I don't think that's the right way forward. I think it should be a functional test against that stack.
I would be super happy if we had essentially a Launchpad directory, whether it's under Juju as another series, like F-tests, maybe it's part of F-tests, I feel like it's more related to the charm store, but essentially charm tests. That was just a list of tests that run. I wonder though, do we run them on every change to every charm of the charm store? Like that's where the selection seems like.
I think we can have rules that depend on the status of the charm and how much we care about it. And ideally, I would like to run on every single change. I think the benefit of that seems to outweigh the cost. But I don't have data to prove that or anything. So.
Right.
We need to feed the output back to the charms though, because the question, the answer is this charm good?
Right.
Can I pull this charm and is it working?
We talked about the requirement. We want to identify the change that broke the relationship.
Yeah.
And
so somehow
it's also just not about the charm, because it can also scan on the Ubuntu package, which can
absolutely.
totally different behavior.
We should be running these out of band, not just on charm changes. We, you know, daily.
but
editing
that's
them.
fine. We can specify stacks in such a way right now for tests that
You can detect that case by running the test that was working.
But you don't necessarily know, you're not feeding on the package queue, you're feeding on the change queue for the charm.
We could feed on the package
So
queue.
what we probably need to have the schedule run whatever the charm change or not, just to make sure.
Like, I mean, we could go every milestone in Ubuntu development.
Agreed.
Like, and then that would cover even the ones outside of Ubuntu development. That's kind of, you know, every 3 weeks or so, we just run them all.
To be honest, having such a fantastic test suite in place, deciding when to run them is
Yeah, as often as possible.
a pretty cool problem.
Yeah.
So I think one key challenge we do need to address with this piece of work is about saying, okay, so I'm going to deploy this stack and test it, because that's how we test this set of charms. How do I know what's gone wrong? So how do I dig into the detail? Do I know if it's an install failure because someone's changed a package and it's broken? How do I know that my charm change is actually because of this?
Yeah.
So getting good
Logging
and, you know, as much data collation as possible from that stack. Really.
So I really wish Monty and Jim from Openset were in here.
What do you want to know?
To run and find them. What's that?
They've been working on testing, so.
Yeah, well, they have
working on them.
they have what you just talked about down to a science, and that they leave whatever broke running and essentially tell the developer, or at least, I don't know if this is what they're doing, or they want to do.
They want to.
That's what they want to do. Right now, they're collecting a whole bunch of logs where we have a predefined set of those logs.
So they just dump them to you.
That's
to mark any charm as failed.
But you can see where it would be pretty powerful to be able to, as these tests run, leave the instance that failed running.
It's assuming that we have someone who's getting, like, we're not leaving them running for months.
24 hours.
Yeah, okay. 24
I
hours,
mean,
yeah.
that's a welcome cost. You have 24 hours. If you get the email, you log in, you have access to the thing that broke.
If you're doing that
You don't have to keep
inside
rerunning
Canonical,
this.
that's going to be lovely. But if you're doing that for someone who's not inside Canonical, there's a problem with that. And that is, when Monty and Jim run those tests, they're behind a rack space firewall that I don't have access to. So leaving it running for me doesn't do me any good.
Well, if we do it on EC2, we can just import ID and give access to.
Sure, but I'm.
I think though, I see your point, because
$2 per error.
Because we have effectively 4 target provider environments, so we have the 2 EC2 supports of OpenStack and EC2 itself, and local and orchestra. Hopefully we'll be able to test these things in orchestra. That's going to be really hard to make
It's just
it
going
work.
to be a little.
It'd be much better to focus on getting artifacts to the changeover groups.
We have a notion of which things are sort of blessed or not, and we bless things that have these criteria and they get peer reviewed, but nothing else should we ever automate deployment tests. Otherwise, we're just opening the door, and basically on our dime, we're going to be setting up for DDoS or whatever. Run this, it failed, leave it in a running state, it's still doing normal things, so you're paying for it.
Yeah, I think should really collect
It's about the
data as much as possible and say, hey, here's what happened. And
Yeah, the tests that we do for OpenStack have the same kind of issue, because we can, you know, if somebody runs a malicious test, they can
Right, but it's
sort
a
of
gate on
bypass.
trunk.
So does
It's a gate on trunk of the blessed format.
a failed test invalidate all of its component charms? And even if the charms have other tests that are passing currently?
It validates the one that had the change to it. It's recorded against the one that had the change to it.
If we can get to that granularity.
Well, we know what we're executing the test case.
It kind of depends how we're coding these things.
Yeah, I guess we could tell where the test failed, what line the test.
Actually, that's an interesting point because sometimes you might do changes to different terms and you want to push them together.
You should.
Ideally, they will run in lockstep mode so that you only pick one of them. In the test run, you only pick one of them at a time. So that
Right, but you might fail one and then because you've made changes. You've upgraded, let's say, something, and if you ran it in isolation, one failed, but you want to do both.
Well, so I really like the charm test stacks. I think this is great. We have some issues to work out with this, but before we leave, it's worth. Our problem is not unique. What do other tools like this do for mocking? Right.
For testing?
Yeah.
They're not. They don't.
Similar things that I've seen. The essentially deploy my entire puppet infrastructure on this one machine and verify that it did.
Yeah, but you need to an infrastructure.
Getting it from outside with
absolutely
or something.
Well, and as one of the things we're solving in Juju is no more siloed infrastructure specific implementation of things. So I don't know that it's useful to copy what they're doing because we're not copying what they're doing in Charms too.
Don't know. There are other tools where the service is only, where mocking is really difficult because there's a lot of context.
Yeah, I do think the test that we looked at before is the kind of thing that we need. I could see wanting some tools to make this easier.
But
I think the interface, I would not like to roll it out. Yeah, right. The idea of testing the interfaces, it can as well coexist with actual functional tests. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice way to document an interface as well, to have something that, if you have a test that very visually tells you what to expect from the interface and you're able to apply that against a charm, it means that it's also good documentation for people to implement charms that depend on the interface as well. So this is, it may be tricky, but we should at least study it and think about the problem.
But it would be acceptable to do two solutions. The first one would just be charm test stacks.
Well, particularly the interface test.
Functional test sounds like an easy win, an easy first win.
I mean, they're in two separate locations. It's not it's only if you introduce a new interface effectively that you would need to have registration of interfaces effectively with those tests and documentation associated to the interface. It's something that is good.
So I'll jump ahead so we can validate one of our requirements. So we have interface tests for several of these interfaces, these stack tests. We stated the second requirement, identify the change which breaks a given relationship. And currently, and I think for all time probably, the charms we want to test live as individual bizarre branches. So identifying the change that breaks it is actually a little bit tricky. And I wonder if we might defer that requirement in order to get something up that tests things out.
Well, even if there's an individual breakage against a change in effectively a stack of charms, then if we keep advancing the test runner, then it'll go green effectively at the end of the change we're set.
I'm not sure how that.
Yeah.
It's been a long day, so take me through it again.
So say you change Nova and Swift. Okay, so then you start running the Nova test, and okay, they're broken because you're not testing against that version of Swift. But then you do test against that version of Swift with that version of Nova because you've advanced the clock, and now they're green again.
Okay, so
you will have some transient things, breakage.
I know exactly what you're saying. So you've got a consistency between two kind of proposed charm changes, which you need to test together. Now, I'm just rolling back to what Monty and James covered off earlier in the OpenStack stuff. Do they have a concept of essentially associating a set of proposed changes together? Or do they test those?
It's a topic.
Yeah. That's not really guaranteed.
Yeah.
Because that's the concept you want. You just want to say, let's take this as a set of charm changes.
It will be, I think, quite a common thing.
Complex deployments. There's nothing you can do about it.
Right now, the gating in OpenStack is per project within OpenStack. There's 5 core. There's no gating on the set of all of them working together, and any lockstep mechanism that we've solved yet for how to make them all basically force that they're all still working together. Usually that's the fist fight that happens about
So we're not getting trunk per se. I mean, we could, but effectively these are post things, so we can basically let them go through it and wait and verify that the graph goes green. Otherwise, we know that there's a failure. So we can basically say, is there other changes in the queue? And if they're not, then clearly this is broken.
Did you ask what's that in the notes? That's you, right?
Well, that assumes the queue doesn't have
What the Garrett topics? Essentially, it's just grouping of changes across different branches.
But
that's done by hand.
I could see requirement for that to make that easier for people to understand why things are broken and to batch yourself change that. I mean, I have to deliver that straight away, but I think it'd be a nice long term.
Sounds interesting. In the case, if we have, I think we need some kind of association as well between stacks will be the final way, right? But we should have some association between the dependent charms and the functional tests.
Yeah.
So this is already going in that direction as well, right? Because then you know that when any of those charms change, you should be running that functional test over there to make sure that the stack as a whole continues to work.
I mean, isn't the relation graph that already?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because the functional test, you may be testing, it may depend on, well, maybe it is. The problem is that it's hard to get working stacks against. No, I don't think it is actually. I don't think it is. When you have functional test, you have you have charm names in that functional test. You cannot build the charm names out of the relationship.
So we had a discussion about this last week about the fact that we would effectively dynamically supply those charm names against the other things that implement the interface.
Yeah.
We could.
But that's huge combinatorial explosion. It's we're not gonna be able to do that in practice. Not for all end to end. It's like multiply 10.
HA proxy shortcuts all HTTP servers.
Yeah, usually it's HA proxy itself.
For promulgated charms.
Yeah, well, actually, we talked about circular dependencies wouldn't be.
Yeah.
They would just say, oh, circular dependency charm.
Yeah. How many charms do we have in OpenStack?
7. There we go.
Yeah.
There's 7.
And that's due to change because you're going to do some refactoring on it.
You only do the graph to depth 1, though. I mean, and of course, the depth is for the
but as we said, you
can't do that one.
Can we not just have
because service might not be
way of
actually
describing
functional, so
what charms
And that's okay. We're going to we'll instantiate the dependencies of the N-1 layer, but
short of having stacks, which we haven't got, we're not going to get this release cycle, which would encapsulate metadata about which charms are involved in it. Can we just not agree to have some way of describing it in a very basic form so that that can be interrogated? If one of those is a merge close against one of those charms, then that stack is
First one, simple, problem.
it will work this release. It's not long term.
So we're saying hard code the names?
I'm just saying that when you define what we're calling a stack test now, I think, is there is a standardized way of describing which charms you're going to be using.
In the stack, effectively, when we have them, that will be replaced as well.
Exactly. So we can replace that. But I think for the time being, we need some way to describe that. Then we can do. We're getting down to implementation details. I think the requirement is we need some way of knowing which charms trigger which stack test.
Right. That's all really good.
Fair enough. I'm still very excited about the idea of being able to dynamically test against all the members of the interface.
Yeah.
I think it's very doable.
Agreed that it is an explosion too. There, especially with some interfaces, we
just
possibilities.
We just can't do it. It's very easy, like 10 times 10, 100. Put a few more, 1,000. It's like it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I think the requirement is
we can turn off.
We'd have to blacklist certain interfaces like HTTP.
Yeah, that's what told
again.
So charm test stack scripts that also specify the component charms.
Yeah. So when we pull one of those in, we know
Yeah.
how to trigger it.
And we just deal with the fact that one failing test.
Which tells us really what understood guessing about a stack.
Did you speak up?
The stacks have their exposed information right in them. We know the entry point into the stack, so we really know what we're interested in verifying.
And even in this case, it will, Juju expose in the stack. The shell script that we're calling the
Right.
stack is effectively the same thing.
Yeah.
So we have just about 10 minutes, and I'd like to get action items, and we don't have to assign them to people, but
Yeah, we do.
we need
Or assign them to the team, or assign them to
They
the team
can be on
so they show
teams.
up on the work track.
No, they're going to be on teams.
Cool,
I'm,
cool.
I'm saying you don't have to volunteer to do it. Don't worry about raising and saying this needs to get done. But we have a lot of requirements there, and I don't think they're all work items. They're just requirements. So let's take a first step towards getting to these requirements in this cycle. We absolutely have to be able to qualify charms in some way, and this is one way we'd like to do it. It runs and it passes its tests.
Right. I have a generic requirements in mind that I'd appreciate if whoever gets to think about a problem kept in mind, which is let's keep it simple.
Yeah.
Well, it's very easy.
Can we put that in the
It's very
default?
exciting. It's very easy to do a
template?
lot of tricky things. Let's keep it simple. Let's make it understandable.
Can we put that in the default Etherpad template, actually?
Yes.
Like requirement one of all sessions, keep it simple? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, given that, I'm going to actually delete the,
Keep it LTSable, I think, is something I would say.
yeah, keep it doable in the next 3-4 months. So we have something.
No.
Yeah, it died. That was a nice, fun little bike shredding session we had. Forget we ever showed you that, please.
But there's still a big hole between what we were talking about and it's how do we actually test, so setting up the stack is one thing, but now what are you actually testing? What determines an actual failure besides one of those steps failing? Okay, that's obvious. But now, is this a Selenium thing? What
I
are you
think
using
that's-
for? I know it's specific to the charm, but
Each test
Yep.
defines what it's testing.
So
But
for
we're-
OpenStack, we're looking for a test where we can run against that. When it's deployed, no, it's working. Details.
I imagine.
So he launches an instance and verifies that the
And other
instance.
stuff like with, yeah.
but in an automated way.
Yes,
It's a
absolutely.
pain in the ass.
So,
OpenStack actually enables that in that particular case. I don't know how viable it is to others, but
action item. Action items. I think we need, the formal spec is always applied, I think, with Blueprint. And action items will come out of that. I want to know, what do we know that we need to do right now? There will be more work items to this Blueprint if it's approved. I guarantee we're not going to identify everything to get this done. And I'm sure we'll say, well, these requirements we'll get this time, and the next time we'll discuss the other ones.
So we need a test runner, we need a way of spelling tests and capturing logs.
We need specification.
We need a spec, yeah. That's, because yeah.
You can put my name there. I'll either do it or I'll find someone to do it.
Okay, so I'll just assign it directly to you.
Yeah.
This overlay pad.
Nice and simple spec. Do we have any time constraints on this? I think we can keep working on this and enriching it right up until the release of 12.04. So this isn't one that's subject
As soon as
to
possible, I think. We already have the official test runner is already,
test runner. Yeah, I'm not worried about.
it's working, right?
Right, but we want to
Place to
incorporate
put
this
them?
into the charm workflow.
Yeah,
So
we have to-
having the spec at least.
So I
of
have
what-
a specific objective to get automated OpenStack testing running early in this cycle.
Okay.
So that as soon as we're proposing changes back into Ubuntu, we know they're good before they land. That kicks in after Alpha 1. So I really need to have that done by then at the latest.
We want to,
By when is that?
Alpha 1, which
Oh,
is
for
December. So
Alpha 1 is always way too soon after you do this, but it has to be.
But then that's when we're bringing in the assurance, velocity, development stuff for this cycle. So that has to. Now I might have to put something stopgap in if we haven't got a final solution, but hopefully that will help write the file or clarification on what we're trying to
So that's that you need to have some known way of spelling and writing tests, but not necessarily that we have an automated test runner running.
I will just,
or you want both. Well, obviously everyone wants.
I don't need a final solution by Apple, but I need something that at least gives us a handle on quality. I've got something that can deliver that at the moment, but I don't believe it's the final solution.
We might, I mean, we could probably have some as a manual test runner, effectively, like against you personally or someone running the test, but not the automatic, pull, chain, waterfall thing, but running the F test that we spec out seems reasonable.
I'm concerned that just make a spec is a little bit outside of our normal processes. I didn't expect that anybody other than server team would actually do this. Like myself and working with James and others would be actually working on this. I don't expect the Juju team to implement most of this. More of a support role. So typically a spec isn't enough to get approval. It typically needs to come with an estimation of work. That's what we try to get to, not necessarily here, but
So what I propose is just to write a spec so that we can estimate the work.
okay. Just making sure.
We're done.
Yeah, go.
Right, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Before we do that, I wanted to mention something. In landscape, we study using a library called Rollout, which is a Python library for functional testing.
So like a mechanized sort of web browser emulator? Or?
No, it's not. It defines it's a test runner first, and then it defines documents which are a succession of keywords, and the keyword is a Python module that do stuff. So you can have actions or assertions.
So
that can be as much as start, distance, or.
I'm concerned. One of the things that we've really done with Charms is sold you write it in whatever you want. We don't want to start selling but the tests you have to use are shit. Like, as much as we could write an awesome set of functional tests with an awesome functional test tool, and we should, we need to make it clear that you can write it like the shell script that we saw before.
Okay.
So I'm hesitant to get too far deep into.
I think that'll be a best practice thing. That'll be like, my charm is really, really great because I used all these tools.
Because I used the functional test.
Yeah, so like I prototyped in this bash script to get it working, and then later on, a year later when I started, that's fine.
Totally fine. Cucumber to me looks like an awesome.
This cucumber looked like the coolest thing I've ever seen. I don't even believe it works.
Effectively, each shell script is a separate test.
But this,
it's like
the
it's
footnote there, it's a it's running every commit.
Right. So the thing,
The failure modes
I've
are
seen it
just
used
the output
for REST
of the shell script.
URLs.
I mean,
and then you do
With
like
regex.
Juju,
Like that discovery we were talking about before.
yeah, the test
far as
runner.
I'm
the
dubious
kills it.
about your thinking, man. Actually, but
We should
yeah,
probably remove bootstrap and destroy environment from the responsibility of the test as well. So,
Yes.
that's a
obviously
fixture.
something, but
I think that's part of the fixture. It's not the actual
That
test.
would be good. Do we need to,
Part of me thinks that
if we're going to integrate these into
Right.
a CI environment of some description, we probably need to specify for Charmers writing these things, if they're going to generate test results as part of running their test suite against their Charmers, what format they have to be in.
exit
that
code
they-
1 or 0.
Yeah. What else can we do?
It's the lingua franca.
There's some more to it than
Or
that. If
zero or
you want to
not.
go down the road, you can get some better benefit. So in particular, if you throw out the G unit XML output, you can have something like Checkins automatically give you a nice trend over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's an equivalent for waterfall, I just don't know.
I would like to see it be a very binary.
well,
Yeah.
zero,
But
zero and not
zero,
zero.
one can be translated into.
Not 1, but not 0.
We can translate that into J unit XML or I mean, we can also introduce additional CLI APIs solely geared around testing, like this failed because of this.
So it sounds like we need something that defines what we can accept if we're going to put that in framework. You see what I mean? So
I think that'll be part of the spec.
Yeah, it'll be like, here's how to write
projects.
it.
I mean, I may pick up an OpenStack integration test, well, functional test project that may do something. I wouldn't be excited about, but that's.
I would hope the spec would define the requirements for each test. That's what it needs to do.
Or add that into
And
the
it would be
wiki
something
iron code.
So
Yeah, it's really
so you know,
Sounds good.
It's streaming format, almost deliberately designed so that you can just write stuff and shoulders. It's on.
wow, what a mad scientist did that. Oh, that sounds about his speed.
You talk about
several years ago.
Yeah, I use that a lot. So.
Anything that's happened arbitrary minor stuff is basically really kind of against extracting better out.
A little bit, sure. Do kickboxing or not do kickboxing? Stupid question.
The magic creator is dead. No, it's not dead. It's sleeping. It's sleeping.